All right, Noah. Well, it is good to be here with you.
Sure is.
Where are we?
We are at the Christian Book and Music room here in the cafe. So, got some chai lattes here.
All right, so the reason why we're here is because we want to talk about Noah's latest book, Love Quest. And this is a really fascinating book that I had the privilege to hear some of what Noah's thought process was behind writing it and also the contents of the book when we were recently on Vancouver Island near Strathcona hiking Mount Albert Edward. It's one of the highest peaks on the island. It was a brutal trek for me, not as much for Noah
It's still
perhaps,
less. Still less.
Anyway, he was able to fill me in on some of the very interesting details, and so I'm happy to be here with him today. You know, we've been friends for a long time. We've known each other since elementary school, and
Grade 6.
so we go way back. We've done a lot together. We've done conferences together. We started running a conference called Gear Up for Youth, and that was in grade 10, right?
Grade 10 we started, yeah.
All the way back to grade 10, we were doing these massive projects together. We wrote a book together called Thrive, A Guide for Life's Journey.
That's right.
And now Noah has continued writing, and so today we're going to talk about Love Quest.
Absolutely.
So, why don't we dive into it?
Sure. Where to start?
Where to start? There's so much that we could talk about. Okay, well, first of all, the title is Love Quest. So, is this a romance novel?
Well, it's not a novel, but it does contain a chapter of a novel. So let me explain. So in 2017, I released my first book, which was called My Promise. And at the end of the book, the main character, Grace, is given a book, and that book is Love Quest. So this is the book that was written to the main character in My Promise. So at the end of Love Quest, you get the final chapter of My Promise. So My Promise is kind of a mystery romance, you could say, kind of novel. So is it a novel? No, it's a nonfiction book, but it contains the last chapter of My Promise, which is a novel. And it certainly talks about love, but it is a nonfiction book.
Okay, so that's interesting. And there's a whole lot of backstory here. I mean, there's a whole book of backstory. Do we need to read My Promise before reading Love Quest?
You don't, but I would recommend it. So My Promise is kind of the setup for Love Quest. So Love Quest is the book written to the main character in My Promise, but Love Quest is still a standalone book. So you could literally just pick up Love Quest and you'd be fine. But it would be more meaningful and make a little bit more sense, and you'd have a more full context if you read the novel My Promise first.
Okay. And My Promise is fiction. Love Quest is nonfiction. Why did you make that distinction? Why have two kind of very different books and one is a sequel of the other?
Yeah, well, I wanted the message of Love Quest to get out to as broad of an audience as possible. And I know some people are more into fiction, some people are more into nonfiction. And so for people that only read fiction or lean towards fiction, I would recommend, hey, check out My Promise, and then you'll kind of want to see how the story ends by reading Love Quest. And if you're not into like novels or anything, you can literally just pick up Love Quest and start there. So it's kind of two routes to get the same story, the same message.
Okay. And so a very basic question is, why did you write this book? And you reference a character named Fiona. So why did you write Love Quest? And what does that have to do with this character, Fiona?
Sure. So you'll have to read My Promise to kind of get the full context of that. But several years ago, I was just going grocery shopping at my local Red Barn Market near my house, and I just had an epiphany. I remember walking in, seeing the person who was scanning my items of food, and just realizing, like, this person probably does not know the grand story of life, that there is a God, that God loves her, and I kind of just felt this heaviness on my heart, like, wow, like, this person probably doesn't know, and this is like the greatest story ever, and if she just understood this, like, her life could be radically transformed. So I remember leaving the Red Barn Market and thinking, someone's got to share this story. And I'd been learning a lot just through my own personal research, reading a bunch of books, reading the Bible, and I really wanted to express to people how the Bible, from cover to cover, is a love story. And so that started me on the journey of writing Love Quest and ultimately My Promise as they go together, trying to get this story on paper so I could share it with people.
Okay. And I know to some extent, some small extent, the amount of work that you put into these books. And that is a lot. Are you some kind of scholar? Like, are you, are we going to be able to understand these books? Are they accessible for, the person like me that I haven't done the research into these topics?
Well, you're the one with the PhD or working on it, so maybe you should know. But yes, to answer the question, yeah, I think it's definitely accessible. I wrote it in such a way that anyone could pick it up and read it and understand it. And it breaks down some pretty complicated topics, but I think in a really accessible way that, yeah, whoever you are, you'll be able to digest it.
Okay, good. Well, I think that one of the most pressing kind of cultural phenomenons of the day is it has to do with love, relationships, family, gender, sexuality, and even just more in general, meaning. What is the meaning of life? Why do I get up in the morning and go to my workplace? Now, a lot of these topics are very politically charged now. You can barely even mention these words without stirring up some kind of electric conflict.
Sure.
And there is a lot of confusion. A lot of confusion. Now, I'm wondering, we're here in this culture. We hear all kinds of different philosophies, different worldviews. What do we believe? I think that's such a difficult question for a lot of people to answer. And I'm wondering, what is in Love Quest? Do we have some answers to these questions about what is the meaning of gender? Is there a difference between male, female? What is the meaning of love? Does Love Quest talk about these things?
Sure. So, yeah, these are some of the biggest, most pressing, hotly debated topics of our time. And one of the reasons I wrote Love Quest is because I wanted to try to get at the answer to some of those bigger questions by looking at the narrative of the Bible. So instead of just cherry picking a verse and being like, okay, this is like what we should believe on this topic, I wanted to kind of look at, well, what is the story arc of the Bible? If we start in Genesis, the first book, and kind of see stories and how the Bible unfolds all the way to the last book, Revelation, how does the storyline and looking at the storyline as a love story inform what we should believe about these topics, such as why did God create gender? Why did God create marriage? What's the point of this being emphasized in who we are as humans and in God's story? So yeah, we definitely go into those questions, but the first step is understanding the biblical narrative so that we can then look at it in context and answer those questions.
Right, and it also covers sexuality, relationships, is that correct?
Yeah, well, that's all part of it, right?
All part of it, okay. Boy, there's a lot to talk about.
Sure is.
Okay. Now, in dealing with these topics, relationships, marriage, sexuality, love, can I be single and read this book? Do I need to be married? What
Certainly.
do you think?
I mean, I started writing this book when I was single, so of course. And yeah, this is relevant stuff for everyone, no matter what stage of life you're in. Like, these are issues people need to understand. Specifically, as Christians, like, it's huge. Like, we need to know what we believe about this, why we believe it, and if we understand kind of God's greater design for all of these things, we're going to be able to live much more meaningful lives.
Right. And that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, Can a non-Christian read your books, My Promise and Love Quest?
Oh, sure. Yeah, My Promise is like a novel, so it's accessible to everyone. Love Quest specifically is looking at the Bible, so 66 books written by 40 plus authors, and how the narrative, over the many hundreds of years that it was written, is a love story. So if you're a Christian and you believe the Bible, it's going to be super meaningful for you. And if you're just wanting to kind of understand what Christianity is about, what the Bible is about, and what Christians really believe about these issues, yeah, it would be a fantastic book for you to read.
Oh. So, you told me a lot about Love Quest when we were hiking through the mountains, and honestly, I was fascinated and I was encouraged as well. I thought it was an exciting conversation. I was learning a lot, and I think you told me a whole lot about what Love Quest is, and I think you could have told me a lot more. So I think my next book to read will be Love Quest, just because there's no way I could grasp all of that information that you told me in one go. But just for everyone listening right now, could you give us somewhat of a picture, an overview, what is actually in Love Quest?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot. I think the book starts off with examining, like, as humans, we are really obsessed with love. If you look at our culture, all the songs on the radio, the movies that we watch, there's this element of worshiping love, worshiping relationships, worshiping romance. And I found that growing up, at least in the church, I was taught a lot about God being Father and He loves me. But I just even remember being a teenager being like, well, you know what? Like, God put in me a more of a powerful desire, like, for, like, I see a beautiful woman. It's like, wow, that's exciting. It's not like I'm sitting in my bedroom obsessing about, oh, my dad loves me. I love my dad's love, but I'm not like, this is like the pinnacle of goodness. My mind was more like, you know what? Like, God's put in me a very strong desire, fascination for women, and He's put that in both genders, a desire for love and romance. So why did God put that there? And that kind of...
So there's a difference between the love that is between a parent and a child, and the love between God and His children, and between a man and a wife?
Certainly, yeah. Yeah, there's different types of love, different types of desire. So I kind of went on this journey to figure out, like, okay, one, why, God, did you place these desires so powerfully in humanity? What does that reveal actually about God, our connection to God? And how to make sense of all of these big issues that are so central in our culture, but also in the church. So in Love Quest, we're gonna start our investigation by kind of like looking at, well, what are some of the core desires in our hearts as humans, as men, as women, and how does this point to God's plan, God's design? Because we're created in God's image. So I think at a very fundamental level, we start with, who are we as humans? We're created in God's image. Who is God? Well, He's a triune God. So there's this element of relationship within the Trinity. We're created in God's image. So we're built for relationship. So that's kind of like the ground floor of where we start, understanding why God created us, what happened in the garden. We'll move through different stories in the Old Testament. And the book unfolds like a mystery. So it's kind of like we're picking up puzzle pieces as we go along. And the more puzzle pieces we gather, the more we're going to fill in the full picture until you get to the end where you can kind of see everything together. So we start in the Old Testament, we're gathering clues, get into the New Testament, we keep gathering clues, and then we see how everything fits together, how the Bible is a love story, and then how we can live our lives in light of that.
And that's how I felt during our conversation in Albert Edward. I felt like you were giving me these puzzle pieces here and there, and I was kind of piecing them together as we went along, going these miles through the woods. And yeah, I did get the sense that at the end of that, there was kind of a complete picture that I was presented. So how does Love Quest begin?
Well, it begins with our culture and what we desire as humans. And from there, kind of before Genesis chapter 1, looking at, well, who is God? What do we know about God and who he is? That'll inform kind of who we are and why he created us. And it starts right in the garden. So in the Garden of Eden, right? The first stories out of the first 3 chapters of the Bible, Adam and Eve made some mistakes. And out of that tragedy, the rest of the story of the Bible unfolds of how God takes that tragedy and turns it into something very beautiful, despite the mess that we made. So that's the starting point.
Now, one of the turning points in Love Quest, I'm sure, as well as in history, is the crucifixion, the burial, the resurrection. And we also talked about the Last Supper, the kind of event that came just before this sequence. Can you tell us about how that turning point, how do you talk about that in Love Quest? Is that relevant for you? What do we need to know about this?
Totally. So, yeah, this is a very exciting point within the book. So, if you read the back of the cover of the book Love Quest, it talks about the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is known as like the greatest lost kind of mystery treasure of all time. And the legends speak that this is the cup that Jesus drank from at Passover at the Last Supper with his disciples before his death. So there's been a lot of crazy embellishments about this. If you've seen Indiana Jones, it's like it's got all this magical power, but we know for a fact that it doesn't have this magical power. But we also know that it is a historical artifact. There was a real cup that Jesus took and that he drank from. And so the premise of Love Quest is, what if Jesus was saying so much more to his disciples when he took that cup, the Holy Grail, and had Passover with his disciples? What if there is huge significance that we are just totally missing out on because we don't understand ancient Jewish culture, we didn't understand the times, and we didn't understand the symbolism that Jesus was giving at that moment? And what if Jesus was revealing something very important about the meaning of love, marriage, gender, and life itself when he took the cup, known as the Holy Grail, and drank from it? What if there's a deep mystery? And that's kind of how the book starts off, with asking this question: what if there's something more here? And there is something more here. But in order to unlock this mystery, we need to go back to the very beginning of the Bible and start picking up clues. And unless you have all of these puzzle pieces, you will not understand what's being revealed. So that's why Love Quest is kind of like a treasure hunt. It's like this grand mystery where we're going back in time, picking up clues, where you're going to learn about ancient Jewish culture. You're going to learn about stories in the Old Testament, New Testaments, prophecies. You're going to learn a lot of stuff. And then it's all going to come together centered in on what was Jesus doing at the Last Supper, and why is this so significant to understanding how we should respond to all these very heated questions that we are facing as people, that the church is facing, that society is facing.
Now, I have some hints of the kind of content that you're talking about. And we don't want to give too many spoilers. Like, if you're interested, just, pick up the book, give it a read. But I do want to have some sense of what you're talking about. So at the Last Supper, I know you've told me a lot of that symbolism you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Can you give one example of that? Some historical fact or significance of the event that maybe the average reader like me wouldn't have been aware of?
Sure. So I'll talk about one detail. So in ancient Jewish culture, when a man wanted to propose to a woman, he would approach her father and he would discuss and negotiate a bride price. So the more money he offered to the father-in-law, or future father-in-law, prospective father-in-law, the more he's saying that I love this woman. So once they had negotiated a price, the woman would be invited into the room, and then she would be given a cup of wine. Well, first of all, the man, the prospective groom, would drink from the cup, give it to the woman, and if she received it and if she drank from it, they were considered legally married at that time. So what most people don't understand, because they don't understand Jewish culture, is that in that moment at the Last Supper, when Jesus was saying, this is the blood of the new covenant. He's using the image in their culture that would be akin to a man going down on a knee and opening up a ring to a woman. When we see that, it's like, oh, he's proposing. If you did that to the ancient Jewish culture, they'd be like, what is this guy doing? He's like, we don't understand it. But because that is our culture, it's not their culture. So that's one of the puzzle pieces and the significance of the Grail in that moment, that Jesus is using clear imagery that of a bridegroom inviting a prospective bride to enter into a marriage covenant with him. So that's one significant tidbit, small bit of information on unlocking the mystery.
Well, I want to ask you so much more about that. I know you can go on and talk about this for hours. But to not reveal too many spoilers, maybe I'll ask you quickly for... during our hike, you were discussing as well some stories from the Old Testament. So we were just discussing the Last Supper, the crucifixion, resurrection as a turning point. Now, historically prior to this, we have several Old Testament events that I believe also shed some light on the significance of the Last Supper and these things you're discussing. Could you give one example for our listeners of a story in the Old Testament that maybe has some parallels to the Last Supper or can shed some light on these things that you're talking about?
Yeah, there's so many stories in the Old Testament, so where to start? Well, in order to understand the context of the Last Supper, you need to understand the history of Judaism and what the Passover meal is all about. So the Last Supper was Jesus celebrating Passover, and the feast of Passover had to do with the Israelites being in bondage in Egypt. They were enslaved, and God said, basically, take a lamb and sacrifice it and smear the blood above your doors. And because of this, the angel of death, which I'm sending into the land to kill the firstborn, he will pass over your house and you'll be spared. So it's the blood of a lamb that essentially is protecting the house. And so you kind of need to understand a little bit about like the symbolism of Passover and where it came from to understand what Jesus is doing at Passover and how he takes the tradition, the ancient Jewish tradition of the Passover meal, and what he does differently and how he changes it and why that change is significant.
Interesting. And one particular example that I want to ask about is the Ten Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that have to do with this?
Well, there is a chapter in Love Quest where we talk about the Ten Commandments. And the premise we begin with that chapter is, what if we looked at the Ten Commandments as a wedding contract? You might be thinking like, what? Like I've not heard that before. But in ancient Jewish culture, even today, there's this document called the Ketubah, and it's like it's a wedding contract, a marriage contract that the bride and groom write out their responsibilities. And what's interesting is once we look at the prophets in the Old Testament, when God speaks to Israel, he specifically references the giving of the law, the giving of the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai, as essentially like a wedding, like between him and his bride, and Israel is referred to as his spouse. So that's pretty significant. And it's interesting, well, what if we look at the Ten Commandments, if we look at them as a wedding contract, are these reasonable things that we could expect a husband and wife to follow within their marriage? So your spouse is supposed to be like your number one person. You're supposed to love them the easiest out of everyone in the world. So would it be reasonable to say, let's just name some of the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not murder, maybe not murder your wife, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not lie, like tell the truth to your wife. If you go through the Ten Commandments, you realize like, okay, this should be like the easiest thing to follow with your spouse because you love them the most. So these are like very simple things, like don't kill your spouse. Okay, well, we live in a broken world, and statistically speaking, the most likely person that you're going to kill if you murder someone is your spouse, which is just sad. But the the law was given by God to show how broken we are, how sinful we are. And there's definitely a parallel image in the Ten Commandments where God is, well, number one, he's showing that we're sinful, that we're broken. We can't even follow this with the people we love. And it also shows that we can't follow these basic laws with God, who is essentially, he should be our number one person. Just as our spouse on earth is our number one person, God says he wants us to choose him as our number one person, but we can't even fulfill these basic laws with God, which is why we need help, which is why we need redemption, which is why we know Jesus came on the scene.
Well, just quickly, I want to kind of draw us back and ask a few simple questions. Having written a book together, we've been asked the question sometimes, like, what is your favorite chapter? And that's something very personal to the author. I want to ask you, what is your favorite chapter in Love Quest?
That's hard because, again, it's kind of like a journey and you're picking up puzzle pieces as you go along. And you need all the puzzle pieces to see the final picture. So every chapter is significant and cool in its own way. But I think just, even the last chapter, like once you've kind of put it all together and then you can see everything, like I could say that that's pretty meaningful. I really, it's nice when you get to the end and you see everything clearly, but you need to go back and you need to have all those other chapters to kind of make sense of everything. So maybe I'll say the last chapter because it's pretty epic, but
Grand finale.
Grand finale, yeah, because then you kind of get some clarity. So yeah, we'll go with that.
All right. So this is there's a whole lot of content in Love Quest. As you can tell from this interview, there's so much more we could talk about. If you could somehow try to summarize Love Quest in 2 or 3 sentences, you just have a moment to describe Love Quest. It's not enough, but what can you give us?
The Bible is an epic love story, and you play a role at the heart of the adventure. Two sentences.
That works.
Or one sentence, whatever it was. Yeah.
Good. And maybe as a final thought, what is one takeaway that you wish that a reader would have? You wrote this book for a reason. You want to share these things with people. You care. You really care about the people that are reading this book. What's something that you want them to gain from it?
Wow. Well, I believe that this book has the power to fundamentally transform how people see God, how they view their relationship with him, to get them excited about their relationship with God. Like, if you understand the story of the Bible in the context of this great love story, it really gets you excited. Like, it's not this cold, drudgerous, oh, I'm going to pray. It's like, wow, I understand why I'm here, why God created me, like, what he's doing, how he's going to restore this broken world. It's like, it's amazing. It's exciting. It gets me fired up. So if you understand this story, like, I wouldn't have spent all this time writing it if I didn't believe that people needed to read this and it would empower them to get excited about God. So I want you to get excited about God by reading this book.
Well, I'm excited for it. And if you're interested, think about picking up a copy, Love Quest, and dig into the mystery.
Absolutely. September 20th, get a copy at noahbolinder.com. It'll be available on Amazon. And yeah, hoping people will get a copy.